So hello everyone, this is Nicole Wood or Wildlife BioGal. Welcome to our next episode of Scicomm Monday. I'm going to give everyone a little bit of time here to log on and then also get everything sent out to everyone on the different platforms here so everyone can log in here. Just to let you all know, this is our second episode of Scicomm Monday, so bear with us as we are still testing out some of the new formats here with the dual periscope broadcast that we are doing here. If you have any questions for any of us, always feel free to send them in via the chat. That way we can answer your questions because we want this to be as engaging as possible. Other than that, we're going to be talking about some science, so any questions you have about that, like I said, feel free to send it in. And then as soon as I get everything copied up here to everyone, we will get started. So, one last thing I gotta click on. Always the fun of having to be your own cameraman and host and producer and everything else. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking with Dr. Cameron Webb, who is also known as Mozzie Bites on Twitter. Here, let's see if I can get everything up. There we go. Yep. So feel free to tweet to myself and Dr. Cameron Webb at our handles afterwards if you have other questions that you have after the broadcast. So, sitting here live, we've got you up and on the screen now. Still fun experimenting with this dual broadcast, like I said. So, I guess my first question, I'll just throw some things out there. So, I saw on one of your, I'm going to jump ahead because usually I ask people, what their backgrounds are and everything. But I saw you had a photo up that had a shark sign for one of your wetlands there. And so, I've got to make sure that I get this question in and that I don't forget it. But how often do you encounter a shark when you're out in the wetlands doing your mosquito research?
Well, I'm very lucky in that if the water's deep enough for sharks, it's usually too deep for mosquitoes, so I don't have to wade too far out into it. But it's unfortunately doing field work in Australia. You're in these wetlands where there's sort of sharks, and fortunately I'm not. There's no crocodiles around my wetlands, but when I'm doing work in far north Queensland, I'm often walking past warning signs about crocodiles to sample mosquitoes in mangroves and things like that. So that's obviously in the back of the mind. But the other thing is that it's easy to forget that. I can be out doing field work in some of these areas at the time when there's a major outbreak of one of the mosquito-borne diseases, so Ross River virus, and I think it's easy for us mosquito researchers to be a little bit complacent about that and our own personal safety when it comes to exposure to some of these mosquito-borne diseases.
So are you one of those researchers that just goes out without any bug spray on and just willy-nilly just rolling loose, or you realize, hey, I could actually catch something serious while I'm out here?
Yeah, for the most part, we don't wear mosquito repellent, mainly because I don't want to contaminate traps with any of the repellent and things like that. But I certainly wear long sleeve shirts and cover up with long pants and stuff like that as much as possible. But you know what? Sometimes the mosquitoes are just so intense, or that we know there's a lot of virus circulating in the mosquitoes that I have to wear repellent. And so, it depends on the situation. But I'm also quite tolerant of mosquito bites, so that's probably the reason I've lasted this long in mosquito research anyway. But there are times where I definitely need to reach for the mosquito repellent.
So for those of you who don't know, Dr. Cameron Webb is at the University of Sydney and also New South Wales Health Pathology. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So I sort of work in two places. I'm employed by New South Wales Health Pathology, and that's a sort of a state-based health authority, and we're involved in a lot of pathology testing of samples for various issues in association with human health. But we're there because we do a lot of testing of mosquitoes for mosquito-borne disease, and help coordinate the New South Wales arbovirus surveillance program. And so that's a program that runs across the state where local authorities send us mosquitoes to test every week during summer. And we test them to see both whether they're carrying virus, but also what species are present. And that information then can feed back to local health authorities that might decide to issue health warnings about elevated risk of mosquito-borne disease. And so beyond that, I've got an academic position with the University of Sydney where I supervise research students and do some teaching on various aspects of mosquitoes, mosquito-borne disease, and other medical entomology things.
Great. So what are some of the more interesting diseases that you've encountered out about there? I know in the U.S., like we keep hearing about Zika coming up, from South America now. So what interesting diseases do you have in Australia? Do you have Zika down there yet? Is that crossed continents to you?
We've had about 60 imported cases of Zika over the last couple of years, but fortunately we've not had any local transmission of Zika virus in Australia. We're quite lucky in that the only mosquito that's actually capable of transmitting the virus in Australia is fairly limited to North Queensland, and so it's not found in any of the big major metropolitan areas of Australia. So unlike North America, where the mosquito is present in places like Texas and Florida where there are a lot of people, fortunately in Australia we don't have it in these big cities. So that creates a bit of a buffer against the importation and outbreaks of things like Zika virus, but also similar virus like dengue and chikungunya virus. So we do have local cases of dengue every now and again, particularly around some of the cities to our north, places like Cairns and Townsville, which are holiday destinations that people may have gone to. They're kind of jumping off spots to go and visit the Great Barrier Reef. Mm-hmm. But there's only really a handful of cases each year. The virus that we're probably most concerned about is Ross River virus. And this season we've seen some record outbreaks of that. It causes a disease which is almost like a bit of a milder version of chikungunya virus, I guess. You get fever, rash, joint pain. The joint pain and the fatigue can be quite sort of severe and debilitating, with illness lasting for weeks or months. It won't kill you, but it can be certainly very debilitating, and we get about 5,000 cases reported every year across Australia. And this summer in particular, we've had a lot of cases on the southeast regions of Australia, thanks to some flooding we had in during spring, and probably also a fairly warm summer too. So it does vary from year to year, but we're fortunate to be free of some of the really serious mosquito-borne diseases, things like malaria and Japanese encephalitis virus. So, but it doesn't mean that we can't be complacent.
All right. So when you're talking about the different diseases, are they all caused by one mosquito? Or are there different mosquitoes that are passed down, or the diseases are passed through?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and for many years researchers in Australia have been doing what we call vector competence experiments, which means you take mosquitoes into the laboratory and see whether they're actually able to transmit these certain pathogens. Because mosquitoes aren't like a blood-filled syringe where infected droplets of blood are passed from person to person. The mosquito itself needs to be infected with the virus before it can pass it on. So when the mozzie bites, she's sucking up blood through some tubes inside her proboscis, but through others she's injecting saliva, and that kind of helps the blood flow. It's a bit of anesthetic, anticoagulant, but it's in that saliva that the virus might be present. And so in combination with the vector competence experiments we do in the laboratory, combined with information we get from testing mosquitoes in the field to see where they're carrying the virus, it really, the mosquitoes that cause the greatest concern can vary from place to place. So if we take something like Ross River virus, there's about 40 different mosquito species that have been implicated in the spread. So it's a little bit, it's not dissimilar to the situation North Americans face with West Nile virus and the range of mosquitoes that can transmit that. But here in Australia with Ross River virus, because there are mosquitoes found in coastal estuarine type environments, freshwater environments in inland regions, but even our backyard habitats, there's mosquitoes present that can spread the virus. The mosquitoes that might be driving an outbreak of disease in one part of the country will vary a lot from another part of the country on different years. So that's one of the reasons why it's very difficult to predict outbreaks of disease based on just environmental and climatic factors, and that's why we've got surveillance programs in place around the country. So, there's nothing better than getting out there, catching mosquitoes, seeing how many they are, and whether they're carrying virus before you can start either doing control or the health authorities issue health warnings to people about avoiding mosquito bites.
So you sent me a couple of photos here of some traps. So I've got one of the photos up of one of the mosquito traps. So can you talk us through what this actually is and how it works?
Yeah, that's a sure thing. Look, science these days is filled with some pretty amazing high-tech ways to do research. But, for mosquito research, the key bit of equipment we use is an old bucket and battery-operated fan. So if people are looking at that photo now, they can see that there's sort of a pale-coloured bucket. That's just a sort of an insulated tin bucket, and we fill that with dry ice. Okay. And the reason we use dry ice is that is carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is the main attractant mosquitoes have for finding a host. That's the common denominator, I guess, amongst all warm-blooded animals. So for a female mosquito that's out looking for blood, because don't forget, it's only the female mosquitoes that bite. She needs the nutrition in that blood to help develop eggs. Okay. But for a female mosquito, that trap might as well be a cow or a kangaroo or a person. Mm-hmm. So she flies around that trap thinking, I can sense the carbon dioxide, but where's the warmth and the smell of the skin of an animal? And when she sort of flies close to that little battery-operated pack that's got a fan there, that sucks it down into a plastic bucket at the bottom. So the reason these traps are really effective for us is that they're collecting the mosquitoes we're most interested in. So they're the female mosquitoes and the ones that are out looking for a blood meal. They're the ones most likely to be carrying the virus, but they're also likely to be the ones causing nuisance biting problems for people. So it gives us a gauge of what the pest issues might be in any one area. And so we set those traps just overnight at various sort of locations. Those mosquitoes are taken back live to the laboratory where they are just killed by putting them in the freezer, counted and then tested for, or ID'd and then tested to see whether they're carrying any pathogens. And I think that's, it's interesting where we might bring in more high-tech solutions to these in the future, because things like DNA barcoding for mosquito identification and new molecular techniques to kind of better identify or more rapidly identify viruses is the way they complement these kind of really quite basic traps that we use.
Right. I've got a photo up here that you sent with you looking at a collection of mosquitoes. So is that about the normal amount of mosquitoes that you'll catch overnight? Like, how many do you normally catch per night in one of these traps?
Yeah, look, that photo is probably a bit of an exception. So for most of the time around sort of metropolitan areas of Sydney or our cities, getting anywhere from 100 to 1,000 mosquitoes would be considered pretty normal. But when I'm doing some work in some of our coastal estuarine wetlands, I think anywhere up to 15,000 mosquitoes can be collected on any occasion. And these are really voracious bloodsuckers, and so in situations like that I basically have to run from the car to set the trap and run back because I've been eaten alive by some of these mosquitoes.
Wow. So if you have any questions for Dr. Cameron Webb, please send them out. Oh, we've got a question here from Karen Joyce, our first Scicomm. So he says, I've heard students feeding mozzies for payment, which blew my mind. I lost the last little part of the question there. So I don't know if Karen can resend that in the last part of the question. I can finish it off while you answer the first half.
Yeah, look, this is one of the problems about keeping mosquitoes, colonizing mosquitoes in the laboratory is that we really need blood to ensure that next generation. And while there are a few mosquitoes that can lay eggs without, or at least some eggs without a blood meal, we've got to feed these mosquitoes. And I guess it's a rite of passage for entomologists to be sticking their arm in a cage of mosquitoes. Particularly for some mosquitoes that preferentially feed on people, that's the most easiest and convenient way to do it. I couldn't tell you what the going rate is for 20 minutes of giving up your blood, but certainly that's like labs around the world do that, and it's a good source of pocket money for other students, I guess. I guess the good news is that these mosquitoes aren't carrying viruses, so there's no sort of health risk in that regard. And some people are certainly more sensitive to mosquito bites than others, and so if you're a bit tolerant, it's something that you can do. But certainly in most labs now, I mean, we're trying to move away from doing human blood feeding. We use a range of animals depending on the type of mosquitoes and the preferences they have. Some labs might use mice or rats. Other labs might use chickens or other birds. And there's also more and more work now being done on sort of artificial blood feeding type approaches where you might be able to purchase sort of wholesale blood in one way or another and use that to feed the mosquitoes, because dealing with live animals is something that we don't always like to do, and so looking for alternatives is something people have been looking at for a long time.
I mean, is it mostly just because there's always that possible risk of somehow getting some contamination somewhere? Like, if you're doing it, like the second half of our question was, do you do that too? But I'm assuming by your answer that you guys do that in the lab. Is there a possible, like, you have to be very stringent with who's feeding them, because you need to make sure that same person is the only person feeding that set of mosquitoes, because you don't want transmission from people that way?
Yeah, look, generally that's the case, although these mosquitoes are sort of, they're in the colony situation, they're not being exposed to a lot of different viruses, obviously, so they're not carrying any mosquito-borne viruses.
Okay.
And mosquitoes can't pick up other viruses from people.
Okay.
So mosquitoes are really effective at picking up and then transmitting mosquito-borne viruses, so things like Ross River virus or dengue or West Nile. But they can't become infected with things like influenza or hepatitis or HIV or Ebola hemorrhagic fever virus. Because what happens is that, again, mosquitoes aren't like a little drinking straw that's moving that infected blood around. When they ingest the blood containing the virus can't infect the mosquito, so it basically gets excreted out with the undigested blood. And so from that point of view, there's very few kind of safety concerns there. It's mostly a severely itchy red arm that students have to worry about. That's probably the worst consequence.
Interesting. Yeah, I always just assumed that any sort of disease that somebody had, a mosquito bit them, that they could transmit that disease. I didn't realize it was only the mosquito-borne diseases, that they could transmit, to other people.
Yeah, that's a pretty common concern. I mean, particularly when, people squash a mosquito on their arm and they see that blood, it can look all very dramatic. But there's not really a lot of blood, and that's pretty much always yours. So, and that's a pretty low-risk way of pathogens being transmitted.
Just another reminder to everyone, if you have any questions for Dr. Cameron Webb, feel free to send those in, and we'll get those asked and answered. So you sent me some pictures of some mosquitoes, so I figured we'd flip through those, and you can tell us a little bit about each one of them. Here, let's see if I can get them all pulled up here. Oops. So the first one we have is a gypti. I'm going to completely butcher these names, so I'm going to let you just say what they are officially.
No problem. So this is the yellow fever mosquito. That's scientific name is Aedes aegypti, and this, in many regards, is sort of public health enemy number one when it comes to mosquitoes and mosquito-borne diseases. And there's two reasons why this is a mosquito we're really concerned about. First of all, it's incredibly effective at transmitting all the really serious mosquito-borne pathogens, so things like dengue, chikungunya, Zika virus. And the other reason why it's such a problem is it's like the cockroach of the mosquito world. It's given up on its original habitat of tree holes and water-filled leaf axils, and it's moved into water-filled containers in and around our homes. And so this mosquito lives in pot plant sources, rainwater tanks, gutters, drains, and just rubbish that accumulates water around the backyard. They don't need much water. They can lay their eggs and they hatch out and complete their development in a really small volume of water. And this mosquito also loves biting people. And so whereas most mosquitoes that would prefer to feed on some other wildlife, it lands on that kangaroo or cow or another animal, feeds until it's full and goes. But the yellow fever mosquito, it's a bit more sneaky. So it loves to have little bits of blood from lots of different people. And what that means is that if that mosquito is infected with the virus, that one single infected Aedes aegypti can then subsequently infect far more people than many other mosquitoes. And that's why when we see large outbreaks of disease, particularly that we've seen in recent years, throughout Southeast Asia and the Americas in association with chikungunya virus and Zika virus, this mosquito really drives explosive outbreaks of disease. And so, in many regards, that's kind of probably the most important mosquito internationally when it comes to mosquito-borne viruses.
Do you know if we have that one here in North America, or is that more limited to the southern hemisphere?
No, you do have that in North America, and that's the mosquito that would have been driving the transmission of Zika virus in Florida. It's present throughout many areas of sort of southern regions of North America, places like Texas, and it's even routinely detected in California as well. The thing is about this mosquito is it generally prefers tropical climates, so it's fairly restricted in how north it can move in the northern hemisphere, or south obviously for us. And so that limits sort of some of the areas that it can colonise. And that's one of the debates surrounding climate variability. If we're living in a warmer, wetter world, is this mosquito's reach going to be increasing into beyond where we currently find it? And if it does, then does that bring with it a risk of outbreaks of mosquito-borne disease?
Nice. So it's something that maybe we might not see up here in the Great Lakes where I am, but 10 years from now with climate change, we might actually see it starting to creep up along with other animals.
Yeah, look, it's certainly possible. It's a big leap to get as far north as your region.
Okay.
But the thing that complicates things a little bit in terms of the prediction of the movement of these mosquitoes is it's not just about climate, it's about human activity and human movement. So what we're seeing is this mosquito and others are moved around by people. They're not necessarily flying further north to create and colonise new areas. The eggs inside water-filled containers or old tyres or other personal belongings are being moved around the world, and that's how they get to new locations and new hemispheres. And if they arrive at just the right time and the climate is just about right, they can maybe set up camp there.
So if I'm moving from Florida up north and I've got a truck full of old stuff and there happens to be some little pockets of water in there, I could be transmitting mosquitoes up and never even realize it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And whether or not it's a mosquito that could then become established or not depends on the local climate. But that's exactly how this mosquito has moved around, and others have moved around the world. One of the most common. There's no doubt that when sailing ships and were sailing between continents, there were water barrels filled with these mosquitoes and eggs. Now it's the belongings and baggage that's carried in planes and shipping that's moving equipment around the world. And authorities around the world are very vigilant to monitor the introduction of mosquitoes at seaports and airports to try to intercept these mosquitoes making their way to new areas.
All right, so just like how we always hear in our ecology classes about how rats got moved all around the world because of the ships, there's also the issue with mosquitoes. We just don't necessarily always see it because they're so tiny.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're tiny, but the implications can certainly be pretty significant.
Nice. So I've got our next mosquito up here. I believe it's Abopictus. I will let you say it officially.
So this is the Asian tiger mosquito, Aedes albopictus, and this is another one of these exotic mosquitoes that we're really concerned about. And one of the reasons, particularly here in Australia, we're worried about this mosquito and why it has implications for North America and Europe as well, is that it's a very good vector of chikungunya virus. It's probably pretty good for dengue and Zika virus as well. And the problem with this mosquito, it occupies a similar niche to Aedes aegypti. It loves living around the home, but also in bushland areas as well, tree holes and things like that. But it's far more tolerant of cool climates. And so this is a mosquito that you're probably more likely to have potential problems up in northern areas of North America. And certainly in places like New Jersey and New York, there's work being done to see what the implications are of this mosquito, not only becoming further established, but even spreading with climate variability. And this mosquito has been responsible for some pretty unusual outbreaks of disease. And so this mosquito was caused outbreaks of chikungunya virus in Europe, where it's been introduced. And most recently, I think one of the most interesting outbreaks to kind of really get a handle on how important this mosquito is in Japan. Japan hadn't had an outbreak of dengue for about 70 years, but a couple of years ago there was about 150 cases of dengue in a major park in the middle of Tokyo, and that was because this mosquito was present. And it's a good reminder that where you have these mosquitoes kind of becoming established in these temperate regions, you may not have annual activity of some of these mosquito-borne viruses, but if a traveller brings the virus into the region and is bitten by the mosquito at just the right time and the conditions are right, you can then get an outbreak of disease. And so that's why we need to be concerned about this mosquito where it is, because although it's still a pretty significant nuisance biting pest, the potential for it to transmit viruses is really great. And so here in Australia, we're really concerned about this mosquito because some of the research we've been collaborating with colleagues on shows that it could easily survive in some of our southern capital cities, places like Sydney and Melbourne and Perth, and certainly Brisbane. And to have this mosquito in the suburbs of Sydney, for instance, where I live, means that we're all of a sudden at risk of an outbreak of dengue, a risk that doesn't exist at the moment. And so you've got a combination of where increased global travel exposes you to these risks, because with more travel, there's a greater chance the mosquito will be introduced into the country. But then also Australians are travelling a lot to places where there's major outbreaks of dengue, so places like Bali and the Pacific. So there's more and more people returning back to the city who might be carrying the virus. And so over time it becomes a major concern that we could see an outbreak of dengue in areas where we haven't seen it either ever before or certainly not for a very long time.
Yeah, and a place like Sydney too, I don't know exactly how many millions of people you have there living in Sydney, but if you have an outbreak there, there's a potential for it to become quite large quite quick.
Yeah, that's certainly right, and there's certainly, the average Sydney sider's backyard is prone to being a good habitat for this mosquito. We actually have our own kind of endemic backyard breeding mosquito, and there's probably not a backyard in Sydney that doesn't have a bit of breeding going on from time to time, and so there's certainly no barrier to the establishment of something like the Asian tiger mosquito should it be introduced.
Nice. So the last mosquito you sent me was Vigilax. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
That's pretty good.
Nice.
So this
1 for 3.
Yeah, that's very good. This is Edie's Vigilax, and so this is one of our sort of homegrown mosquitoes, and this is a mosquito that doesn't live in the suburbs. It's more in our kind of local swamps, and this is the mosquito that I spend most of my time working with. It's found in estuarine wetlands, so tidally flooded salt marsh, mangrove and sedgeland environments. The mosquito lays its eggs in the soil and vegetation in these wetlands, and they're desiccation resistant, so they can sit there for probably many years, sometimes waiting to hatch.
Wow.
So during summer, when it's flooded by tides, these eggs hatch, and during the warm weather they can complete their development in about a week or so. And the problem with this mosquito is that it can be produced in kind of incredible abundance, and so about 10 days or so after the tides that flood the wetlands, you get these incredible swarms of mosquitoes moving up out of the wetlands, and they fly many kilometres away from the wetlands. They're a severe nuisance biting pest, and they're also a good mosquito at being able to transmit things like Ross River virus. So all around, they're probably one of the most important pests that we have in coastal areas of Australia.
Wow. Well, we're just about running out of time here, so I'm going to remind everyone where they can get a hold of you at. So if you have other questions for Dr. Cameron Webb, please contact him via his Twitter handle at MozzyBites. Also, you can look up his email. You seem to be everywhere. You have Instagram and other things up on there that's blogging. Like, I found a gazillion pictures of yours that were up there, so you have multiple formats that people can get a hold of you with.
Yeah, there's lots of ways. I'm pretty using your favourite search engine to look for Cameron Webb mosquitoes will turn up a dozen or so ways to try to find me, and I'm happy for people to reach out and happy to answer any questions people have.
Great. And then if you've got any questions for me, obviously feel free to talk to me via wildlifebiogal.com. You could also contact this Periscope at Scicomm Monday. And then just a reminder for next week, we have Charles B. Van Rees, a PhD student who does work in Hawaii with rails, and I forget what else. It seems like he's got so many pictures of different birds over there, so it should be interesting. We're slowly moving our way across the Pacific. Maybe we'll eventually get someone from North America on here, but slowly. But until then, I just want to say thank you for joining us, and if anyone else has any questions, to tweet you or tweet me at our various handles. So
that sounds great, and thanks so much for having me on Scicomm Monday. This has been really great, and yeah, I'll look forward to coming back sometime in the future as well.
Great. Well, thank you for being on, and everyone else, have a great rest of your Monday or Tuesday if you're in Australia, and we'll see you next week, same time, same place.